I'm just going to start recording the session right now. So welcome everybody. Hope the weekend went well, and things are still coming in on the marking front. So I'm going to try to do my best in this afternoon and tomorrow to get caught up on the marking and feedback and whatnot, and give you some more opportunities, I guess, to refine your craft. And some people have been taking the feedback I've been giving them and resubmitting certain blog posts or things like that. If they forgot something technical, I forgot to put a hyperlink in, or my navigation still isn't working very well, or forgot to tag or create a category, that feedback's been given to you, and make sure that you're looking at that feedback. If you're in the My Grades area, you should be able to see the assignment, the due date, that you've submitted it, and either that it's waiting to be marked or that it has been marked and here's the feedback. You should be able to see all of that specific feedback. So so far, several people have made improvements, and including some of those things that they may have forgotten, or expanding upon a topic in the 3 stages of production, for example, or the comparison contrast between 2 different media pieces with regard to the stages of production, and have resubmitted that and have indeed fixed things and gotten higher marks. So I continue to encourage you to do that. I do try to mark the resubmissions as quickly as I can. However, current stuff, first submissions from students get priority. So sometimes if you've submitted something or resubmitted something to try and improve your mark, that might be at the bottom of my marking pile until I can get to it. But usually I'm able to rip through them pretty quickly, particularly if you just throw a little comment in the right area, say, I fixed the links. Well, now I know exactly what to look for. I can mark it. I can see that you've learned the skill and used it appropriately, and then very quickly upgrade your mark and move on. So if you can just give me a little prompt as to what needed to be fixed in the right submission area, that speeds things up a little bit. Stick to the class assignment calendar. I noticed some students have started kind of drifting behind a little bit, and I understand we're getting really into the flow of school and whatnot, and there's some extracurricular activity starting up. I assume football, and people are getting going with volleyball and fall sports outside of school. So I understand things are starting to get a little bit more busy for you than they probably have been. But at the same point, we know what our job is with regard to school, and I've done my best to provide you with a pretty good roadmap to get from the start of the course to the end of the course in the time we have, as long as you're keeping up. You do not want to fall behind on these early assignments, because most of these earlier assignments, these blog posts and a couple HTML skills and widgets and whatnot, these are not difficult things to learn for most people. And it's no problem if you do have a struggle with it a bit because you're not as used to the technology. But in general, if you either kind of know what to do or are able to read through the materials and watch the materials and replicate them, they're not long assignments, they're not hard. You need to get these done, and you need to get them in, according to the calendar. And the reason I'm saying that is because when we get to the bigger projects, like where you have to write a script and write a treatment and then start doing like an audio production and then edit that audio production and go through the creative process on the front end, it takes a lot of time. And if you've got a bunch of little assignments hanging around here and you're trying to focus on the big assignment, your attention's just divided, and it's just too difficult to do it. So my strong recommendation is, if you feel like you've fallen behind a little bit, you're probably going to want to dedicate a couple of extra hours this week or on the weekend or something like that to try to get caught up before we move into audio production, because that's when things start getting a bit more, they just tend to take a little bit longer and take more creative energy and whatnot. So some people have mentioned that in chat and an email that things are pretty easy so far. That's true, and that's intentional. We want to kind of get people going and just step you up a little bit of time with regard to interactive blog skills. But it certainly will get more challenging. And there's going to be a lot more thought that you need to put in with regard to creativity, and a lot more work you need to put in for pre-planning and writing things out carefully and doing storyboards. Those things do take a lot of time. So make sure that you're prepared for that, and try and get back on track with that course calendar if you feel like you've dropped off a little bit. So we are in the section, and some people have created the assignments on this already, but we haven't really talked about it inside one of our live sessions. I just wanted to give people an opportunity to speak out or to give examples of their own. But we're really talking about in module 2 and the beginning of module 3, as we move forward into our own planning, is legal and ethical and cultural issues and situations in media today. And it's something that's gotten a lot of press in the last, and a lot of emphasis, both politically and in the media industry over the last, say, 30 or 40 years, and even more so in the last 10, with the proliferation of easily accessible global media. Most of you are in your mid-teen years, and you've probably, well, you have had access to all of these international multimedia products for your entire life. Whereas, I'm older, I'm 43, and a lot of these, web-based global communication pieces weren't around when I was young. So I'll pose the question, looking at maybe your parents or grandparents, with regard to global messaging, how did you reach people in a different nation to communicate with them 40 years ago? What were the ways you could do it as either a human being? Put yourself in the situation that you're either just a regular human being, you and me, or if you're a corporation, a company who specifically wants to sell something or market something to you. How did people communicate with another nation, or people in another nation, or audiences in another nation 40 years ago? Any ideas? Letters, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. I had a cousin who lived in Germany, and I would often write her letters, and it would take months to get there. And then she would read the letter and she would write me one back, and it would take months to get back. But absolutely, printed material. Yeah, we absolutely did that. What else would we have done as just sort of a normal person to communicate with somebody in Shanghai, for instance? So some of the other things that we did would include, from a sort of regular person perspective, phone calls. We would call, and you can still do it, obviously, you can still write letters, but we would call a long distance, and would be very expensive. At least it would be quicker than sending a letter. But phone calls in those days to international sources were typically very expensive. Personal experience, we had landline phones, and that's what they were, because it was before the days of cell phones, of smartphones. And we had an exchange student live at our house for a year. She was from Japan. She was from Tokyo. And she would call her mother and her father and talk to them about once a month, which, doesn't sound like much contact with mom and dad, but here's the reason why. An international phone call at that point of, say, 45 minutes to an hour could very easily cost you $200 to $300. It seems ridiculous nowadays that you could talk to somebody for half an hour and the bill would be $300. But that's the way it was back then. The equipment was expensive. The lines running to different nations were often run through the sea, in the sea floor or ocean floor. There were satellites, but it certainly wasn't as commonly used, and those things are expensive, which means phone companies had to charge more to make up the money for that. So if you were using that cable that went across the ocean floor all the way to Tokyo, they're going to charge you a lot of money to help them recoup the costs of that. So that was a way that we could communicate, but it certainly wasn't. It was timely, but it was very expensive, and we didn't really have a way of broadcasting, doing a video chat or seeing what was going on the other side, unless you had big money and access to recording equipment. So with regard to sort of normal people communicating with others across the ocean, we had, we could phone people, we could fax people, we could call people. Writing people was slow. Calling people was quick but expensive. Faxing, I guess, was a quicker way of getting a letter, but you need to rely on the other person to have a fax machine, things like that. Those weren't the only ways that you could communicate, but I think that kind of generally was the case for normal people. If you were a corporation and you were trying to sell something in a different country, it was difficult as well, because you didn't have access to face-to-face communication unless you had really expensive equipment back then. So if you have a product you're trying to sell in Japan, usually you would have to have an employee that either lived in Japan already or that you sent over to Japan, and that's going to cost a lot of money. I mean, you've got to probably provide them with accommodation, a salary increase to cover the inconvenience of moving to another place. There's language issues and training and things like that. It's a very expensive proposition, even if you hire somebody on the other side who is already in Japan, who communicates with you regularly. There's a lot of cost involved with that. If you're marketing your materials, you could do it with posters, you could do it with printed materials. That's that's a significant expense as well. You have to organize that in a different country. You have to have your creative forces, and your marketing team has to be very aware of the current political and economic and cultural context in the area. And you have to use the media, the printing presses, and the distribution methods of that nation. And all of that stuff may be very different from the way that you're used to doing things back in North America. So there's significant risk. There was significant cost involved with it. It was a big deal. If you wanted to create a TV advertisement, you ran into the same sort of issues. So the way that we communicated, right, either as just a regular person or as a business, was significantly more difficult 40 years ago than it is today. Today, we've got people working remotely all over the place. We're essentially doing a virtual live session right now. You can see me, you can hear me, I can share my screen, I can share my materials. And these types of advances in modern technology have allowed us to communicate with other nations and other parts of the world much more efficiently, much less expensively, and ideally to the benefit of both the consumer and the marketer, or the filmmaker and the viewer, radio broadcaster and the listener, that sort of thing. So all this technology can be used to bridge those gaps, but you have to always be sensitive to the reality that things are not the same in different places of the world as they are where we live in Canada. There are very often very highly charged political or economic or cultural, racial, legal things that are happening in other countries that you need to be aware of if you're going to make media that's targeted to them. We always keep our audience in mind, because if you create a message that is great for you, as a creative exercise, you might get fulfillment out of that, and that's great, and that's part of what building media is about, especially smaller scale student projects. But usually at the end of the day, there's a goal to reach other people, or reach other people while making money, or while selling a product, or while getting some message across. And it's not just for you. So if you're in that environment and you build media that you like, it is just for you, and it doesn't work for anybody else, essentially it has failed as a communication product and a communication media. So you always have to keep that target audience in mind, and in keeping that target audience in mind, you have to be very in tune with the social, political, cultural environment that exists in that nation. And people and companies make mistakes all the time, and huge multinational corporations that should know better make mistakes all the time, where they don't read the political and social and economic climate and sort of state of being for that nation at the time. They don't read that properly, and they end up creating a product of a media product that either misses the mark completely or generates really strong negative emotions because they have offended in some way, or they have broken sort of a cultural rule in that society. And that is a very, very difficult juggling act to do. And there's a couple examples that have been posted, that we posted in that section, that go through that. And some of them are absolutely cringeworthy. I mean, if you watch the Wiggles video, I'm not going to watch them all again now, but if you watch the Wiggles video, it's just a virtual cringe fest of cultural misappropriation, where somebody of a specific culture has been sort of tokenized and brought into this marketing piece, which was a kids show. I mean, it really wasn't trying to sell anything. It was the idea was the right idea. It was intended to sort of bridge cultures and bring people together, but it did it absolutely in the wrong way by completely tokenizing the person's culture and cultural practices. And we have to be sensitive to that in building partnerships, because when you are, it's called ethnocentrism. When you intentionally or unintentionally impose your values upon other people or tokenize their cultural or worldview experience, it drives people apart, doesn't bring people together. So you've got to be very sensitive. So even if the end goal, well, I meant it to be like this, even if the end goal was justifiable and generally a good idea, if it's implemented poorly with your media, not only have you not brought people together, you've probably done the exact opposite and driven people away. So that one video for the Wiggles, which is a kids music group from Australia, was absolutely cringeworthy. And then there's some other examples of both misreading a situation and understanding a situation, occurred political, economic, social context, and doing things properly. So for instance, in Saudi Arabia, progression of women's rights of women, and rights of human beings was really essentially what you're saying. There's always been a very sort of very politically and socially charged set of roles and expectations based on gender, which hopefully is slowly evolving toward again, partnerships and equality and equity and whatnot. But one very specific cultural law in Saudi Arabia was that females aren't allowed to drive. And so that's something that doesn't exist here, and that's something that unless you're from the Middle East, or if you're from Saudi Arabia, you might not be all that knowledgeable about. So if in this case, Burger King in this particular ad intended to make a positive message about, and sort of keep a current event, because in 2018, Saudi Arabian women the law was changed and they were legally able to drive. So Burger King wanted to kind of jump on that current event kind of thing and make an ad that included this cultural shift in a way that helps them sell burgers really at the end of the day. So the intention was good, but when you watch the video, you'll go, oh, they blew it, and they probably, again, when you don't hit your mark and you don't do your research, it doesn't just not work. It doesn't work, and it does damage. So it shows you that you have to be extremely careful. You have to be extremely capable, and you need to. And this is so important. It doesn't matter what nation you're talking about or whether you're talking about media or not. You have to involve the people that are in your target audience in your planning, in your development, in your production, in all the phases. Because if you do that, then you've at least got, at minimum, you've got that sort of sober second thought where if you make a mistake, by involving people in the planning process for your product, they're part of the team, or maybe they're leading the team, they can catch those and address those and help you work and help you improve and refine the message until it's both culturally appropriate as well as an effective marketing vehicle for whatever it is you're trying to do with your media. Now, you'll hear me refer to the marketing effect and your company and whatnot a lot with media, because a lot of people who do graduate in this area and move on to do communication media for a living, the vast majority of them end up working for other companies who are trying to market things. Now, whether you're trying to sell something as a corporation, or you're a nonprofit intending to get a message out there or solicit donations, or even if you're working on say a feature-length movie, ultimately you're working for a company and you're working to reach an audience and somehow generate income from that audience. The people who create media just for the sake of creating media and not generating any revenue from it, that tends to be a pretty small subset of people who work in the industry or support themselves with communication media. So if it seems like I'm focusing a bit much on the corporate end of it and marketing end of it, the international economics of it, it's because that's what 90% of the industry is, and your messages and your media and the choices you make have to support generation of profit or money coming in for nonprofits or things like that. Okay, so at the end of the day, you have to be sensitive to what's going on in your target audience. And if that target audience is significantly different and in a different area and with different cultural, political, economic, spiritual practices, you need to have representation. And if you can't afford representation, you have to do enough research on your end to make sure that your message is straightforward and doesn't break any of those barriers that other nations have. Barrier might be the wrong word, but sort of cultural, spiritual, economic, etc. Factors that are part of their daily life, and you have to be very cognizant of those. You have to be aware of those, and you have to have a plan to make sure that your message is right. And sometimes it's really simple stuff. Sometimes it's funny. And I've got some examples. Some of them are safe for school. Some of them are not safe to school, of little things that have really changed the effectiveness of a message that were completely unintentional and probably should have been caught by somebody, but weren't malicious in any way, shape, or form. For instance, there was a sign for a video store. I know they don't exist anymore. It wasn't Blockbuster. I can't remember exactly what the store's name was, but the font that they had chosen had turned it into, instead of Flicks for the end, it wasn't Netflix either. It was just way before that. The video store had Flicks in their names more, but just the font that they had used for the lettering made it look like the F word. So obviously that was something that was completely unintentional and kind of a big surprise for everybody. Chevrolet made a car in the 70s, 60s, 70s, probably into the 80s, called the Nova. Chevy Nova was very popular in North America, sold really well. They wanted to bring production down or open their markets up in Mexico. So Mexico being a nation that speaks Spanish, they had to translate all the marketing materials and the ads and whatnot into Spanish. And when they launched this campaign south of the border down in Mexico, it was brought to their attention relatively quickly that the term Nova in Spanish somehow related to does not work or does not go or no go or something like that. So the word the name of the car in North America, nobody batted an eye. Nobody know what a Nova is. It's some star thing, right? Supernova or something like that. But it didn't ring any negative bells. Whereas in Spanish-speaking culture, if you're trying to sell a car that's roughly named does not work, it's clearly a marketing mistake that somebody along the line should have caught. And it would have been the easiest thing in the world to catch if you just had somebody from Mexico or somebody that spoke Spanish on the team saying, "Oh, everything looks great, except you got to change the name of the car because that's not going to work down here." And that happens all the time, and it should be caught. And sometimes it's really funny, the things that come out of these cultural or language mistakes or things like that. But sometimes it really does significant cultural damage. Obviously, Chevy trying to sell a Nova in Mexico is not going to create a whole lot of political and political, religious, legal backlash. It was just a mistake that I think is kind of funny, but it was probably a big deal inside Chevy at the time. But Mexicans will still buy Chevy products at some point. It's probably not going to be the kind of mistake that completely destroys your reputation in a nation. So something to be aware of. It's certainly something that didn't get nearly enough thought in the golden age of advertising, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But today it's absolutely crucial because your audiences tend to be global in nature. Even if you're not specifically targeting an audience, if that media is available to an audience, even if they're not your target audience and it's offensive, or if it essentially offensive or illegal or transcends those boundaries of acceptability, someone will find it and it will cause a problem for you, and you hear about it all the time. And companies can be brought down by things like this, essentially. I remember there was and it might be linked in here somewhere too, there was I think it was an Oil of Olay commercial or a Dove commercial where I don't even know what they were going for, but essentially the person used they had a white lady, and she or an African American lady, and she used the product and then basically ripped off her shirt, and she would, all of a sudden she was white. And I should look at that again. I should have looked at it before I came in here, but I remember going like, what did I just see? Like, no matter what you intended, and I'm sure they didn't intend it to be racist, they probably intended it to be, hey, look, we're coming together, black and white, and everything's fine. But what it really came off as was your skin was dark, and now your skin is light after using a cleansing product. So the darker skinned person was dirty in some sense, or tainted. Anyway, what they intended was completely not what people got out of it, and it caused major backlash. And it's something that should have been caught with probably better representation and a vetting process when they were discussing, is this a good idea? What's our goal? How are we going to get this message across? How are we going to make sure that we are sensitive to any of the racial undertones that could pop up in this? And they just did a very, very poor job of it. So that deals a lot with the sections in Module 2, the legal, ethical, cultural impacts of your media. And I think the assignments are reasonably straightforward. So hopefully you're not having a whole lot of issue with that. The rating system is really just quite straightforward information that you can find online. Copyright and public domain, again, it's something that is very easy to find. You shouldn't have any trouble finding the responses that you require, and also posting opinions, well-informed opinions about the state of media, about these big issues inside of global media today. And that's what essentially blogs are for. Blogs shouldn't just be a sounding board for uninformed opinions, but they're supposed to be a way for you to communicate things about yourself, about your views, about your worldview to a bigger audience. And obviously you would like to be well informed. It's okay to have an opinion, but make sure that opinion is well informed, and make sure that your message is appropriate and effective. Okay? And not everybody's message is appropriate. Not everybody's message is effective. Sometimes people are just emotional and loud, and that's protected, at least in Canada and the US. You do have a freedom of expression. There are websites out there dedicated to, dedicated to racist views and homophobic views and political views that are extremely unpopular. People are entitled to believe what they want to believe. People are, within the bounds of our Constitution, allowed to post their opinions as long as they do not infringe upon the rights of other people. So there are these messages in society. There are these messages in media all over the place. And all you need to do is open up your Facebook to see it. But oftentimes those opinions, those blogs, those posts are ill-informed or hateful or just inappropriate in general. And although they are somewhat protected by laws of free speech and liberty, a lot of times I think people don't understand that those laws protect you from prosecution for having an opinion or having a viewpoint, but they don't protect you from the consequences of your views and of your posts and whatnot. The freedom to say something is not necessarily protect you from the consequences of saying that thing. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand, as well as you have rights, but other people have rights too, and your rights can't infringe upon the rights of other people. So there are some lines you have to follow, even though in general free speech is in Canada anyway, in North America, is generally respected and protected. There are definitely nations in the world where free speech and the liberty to express, to have, hold, and express certain viewpoints or certain ways of life are not protected and often punished. And I won't go into into detail right now, but if you have family members or friends from certain nations in the world, they could probably tell you pretty horrible stories about the way that a certain cultural group is treated, or perhaps LGBTQ populations are treated, or the government political party being the only party, and any dissenting opinions about that party being ill fit to run government. Those sorts of things are controlled and punished in certain areas of the world, and it's something we're not used to in Canada as much. I mean, we have our problems. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we have convoluted messaging all the time about issues of racism and issues of political freedom and things like that. We have our issues, but they're different from issues of places around the world. And there are certain things that are protected here in Canada that are just not protected in other places of the world. And the consequences of breaking those political, social, spiritual, etc. rules in those questions can be very, very severe, like including being sent to jail or being executed or things like that. Just things that we wouldn't consider to be a sort of a normal consequence in Canada. So people do need to be aware of that. I'll give an example of something that is not related to media, but is an indication of cultural differences between two nations, and that is drug trafficking. In Canada, drug trafficking is illegal, and if you get caught, you will be charged and you will be taken to court, and if you're guilty, you will go to jail. And depending on what offense it is, or how much we're talking about, you're probably not going to be in jail for the rest of your life. Well, there are nations in Southeast Asia where smuggling any amount of drugs into the country or out of the country is punishable by death. So it doesn't matter if you are from that population. If you're anywhere in the world and you create that and you commit that crime on foreign soil, they will take you in. They will give you a probably unfair trial. Maybe it's fair, but they're in some instances I've heard that the trial might not be all that fair. But anyway, you committed a crime which essentially in Canada is serious, but is not going to you'll have some prison time, but it's not going to end your life. Whereas over there, you could be dead, executed legally by that country and that country's judicial system because you broke the same law there. So, the crime was the same, but the consequences for taking that position or putting yourself in that position are very different based on the laws and the views of the country. And the same thing goes for media. You have to be very aware of that. The fallout from breaking some of those guiding principles, norms, social views in certain places, probably would oftentimes is so much more than you would have expected given your experience living in Canada. And that's just reality. You have to be aware of that when you're creating media. Okay, so I think I've kind of beaten that cultural, ethical material around enough. We should be focusing on for this week and the next week, starting to get into audio production. Okay, before we worry about video and audio, let's just worry about audio for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and use Soundation as an easy spot for us to build and generate and edit music and sound clips and things like that. But I am also certainly amenable to letting you use software of your own. Some people have used like Audacity or thinking of it, the Adobe one. God, I should just check what it is. Audition, that's what it is. Adobe Audition, which is sort of pro recording studio. Some people have like Pro Tools because they're musicians and things like that. Frankly, I as long as you're meeting the requirements in the assignment with regard to the quality, with regard to the pre-production, production, post-production, editing, it doesn't matter to me which piece of software you use. There are apps on your phone that are getting very good for audio and video editing and the post-production effects and fades and just little things you need to put in to make it sound like a professional piece. I don't expect people to have a full-on recording studio with all sorts of different mics and software equipment and switch and soundboards and stuff like that. But there are good options even if you just have a smartphone. The microphones tend to be getting better and better as over time. If you have a dedicated microphone or something you can use or have used, use it, but just make sure you're listening to it carefully. And if it sounds staticky or distant or whatnot, it just doesn't sound professional, and you'll get it if it sounds right or not. There's a lot of background noise and things like that. You have to do it again if you can hear dad cooking supper in the dishes and your sister playing upstairs. You're probably going to want to try to record that again or find a better environment to record in. So I'll leave that mostly in your hands, but I wanted to try and keep it as flexible as possible so that you can use the hardware and software that you have at your disposal that will help you do the best job you can do with this media. And that being the case, I can't offer necessarily a whole lot of very direct tutorial information on how to edit and the hardware of it if everybody's going to be doing something different. So I think I'm going to dedicate my resources on this to helping you sort of one-on-one if you have an issue, if something's not working right, if something doesn't sound right, if there's a technical problem. I think I'd rather work with you one-on-one to solve those. I think if I just put a bunch of tutorials up and only 1 out of 25 people is using it, then it's probably not worth the effort for you or for me. Our time is better spent kind of troubleshooting these issues one by one. But there should be enough information up there regarding generally the process, the pre-production stages, of script writing and storyboard. Well, I guess storyboard is more for film, but definitely script writing and treatments and things like that are generic enough that the information up there is certainly what you can use. And then just reach out to me if you're having any issues with regard to your audio production. So this is really, I mean, you could consider the interactive blogs and the setup production. We didn't really do any pre-production. We just kind of did it, and we're refining it in our post-production by adding certain things in after the fact and learning new skills and whatnot. But this will be the first time that you actually have a dedicated pre-production facet. And I'll be frank, it is something that a lot of people don't enjoy because it's planning and it's writing and whatnot. But the reality is you can't do media. You can't do good media without it. Nobody just shows up with a camera and no idea and manages to make great media products. It doesn't happen. You have to plan it. You have to have a goal. You have to have a vision. And if that changes as you're recording or as you're producing your product, that's fine. It's okay for plans to change. It's not okay to not have a plan. So even if it's not your favorite part, do it well, and you'll find that your projects and your products are better as a result of it. Okay. So we're about 40 minutes in here, and we're at a section of the course where you're going to have a little bit more creativity here. So I'm going to open it up to questions and of any nature of the course, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if there are none, then I'll leave you to your work. And we will probably have a very, very short session on Thursday. Again, everybody's going to be doing something different. There isn't really a big topic that we can tackle as a group. So if on Thursday's meeting your time is better spent just in production, that's totally fine. I'll be here. I'll check in and I'll try to answer questions. But by all means, don't hesitate to email me if there's a problem and I can help you out with it. I can do a little bit if you're having trouble coming up with an idea, but essentially I want you to be creative, and I'm not, I could, but I don't really want to do that creative lifting for you. I might nudge you in a certain direction if you're really struggling, but that's a really important part of this class and your expression. These media projects, although adhering to good production techniques and habits that we know are effective, you're going to have to create your own messages, and those messages are going to have to be from your own creative space because you're the one that matters. Thanks for joining. Have a good day. Not seeing or hearing any questions, so I think we'll wrap it up. And again, on that Thursday meeting, I will be there. But certainly, if you're in the flow and you know what you're doing, just carry on and let me know if you have any trouble.